Hey there, welcome to the embroidered watercolor workshop. Today we are going to be making 3 pretty pieces of watercolor, and then we are going to be embellishing them with some fun embroidery stitches. So let's go ahead and get started with some supplies. What you're going to need is you're going to need a watercolor palette, a variety of brushes, some watercolor paper that I have cut down to 5x7s. You can make these 4x6s, you can make them 8x10s, you can make them bigger. It's entirely up to you what size you want. I prefer little ones just because it's a lot easier to do and they feel more fun. They're not as stressful to me, so I do little pieces. I'm also going to be using a heat gun to dry in between my layers. I have embroidery needles, and I have some embroidery floss that I'm going to be using. So let's go ahead and get started on our first piece. So what we're gonna do is the first thing that you want to do on a watercolor is you actually want to prep the paper. So I'm gonna take one of my great big brushes and I'm just gonna get it a little tiny bit wet, and I'm just gonna run the water over the surface. This is preparing the paper so that it actually takes a lot more of that watercolor. You can also use watercolors as a dry paint. That's not what we're doing in this particular workshop, but that is an option if you would rather do that instead of wetting down the paper and prepping it. I'm going to go ahead and just do it because that's how I like my paper, because the color spread out a little bit more. So once you're done with that, you're done with your big brush. And I'm just going to take one of my rounds, one of my fairly big ones, and I'm going to start creating background. So I'm going to use a really pretty burnt orange color. And remember, you can use any color that you want to use in here. This is your piece of artwork. Make it look like your decor. Make it in your favorite colors. Make it in someone else's favorite colors if you're making it for them. Use whatever colors you would like, okay? And what I'm going to start doing is I'm just going to kind of blend a little bit of my orange kind of around the edge here. And the great thing about watercolors is the more water you use, the more they kind of spread. So if you get a lot more on there, you can kind of tip them, run them, move them around a little tiny bit. And then on my backgrounds, I don't really want these super harsh edge lines. So I'm actually going to take just a pure water brush. There's no color in this at all. And I'm just going to kind of run it along my edges. Just so I can smudge those little harsh lines a little bit more, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and just do that in a couple more spots. And you can also do it like you see how when I'm brushing, the front of my brush, the tip, has more of the color than the back of my brush. So as I'm kind of going in this direction, a lot of that color stays back here in the back and gets lighter when I go out to the edge. It's just because there's less color in the edge, so it's not pulling it out. Okay. Like I said, I'm just gonna loosen up those edges a little tiny bit so it's a lot less dramatic on the edges. Okay. And these paintings are very abstract, so they're kind of going to be just random all over the place. There's no real specific spot to put anything. Put it wherever you kind of like it. Alrighty, so I went with my heat gun, not on camera because I don't like the noise that it makes when it's on the camera. It's incredibly loud. So I went and I actually used my heat gun and I just blew over the top of these colors so that they could actually dry a little bit, because I don't want my two color layers to blend together. So if you dry the layer underneath, they're a lot less blendy when you put the next color on. If you want your colors to kind of bleed together, keep them wet. That way they'll kind of smudge around to each other. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a really pretty blue in here because everybody knows that copper or orange looks really good with a nice, beautiful blue. So I'm going to go in here and just do some blue. And again, I'm not putting these in any particular spot. I'm just kind of doing what feels like the painting wants to do. It's kind of just a go with your instinct kind of a thing when you're doing abstract. Okay, so I'm just going to clean off my brush here real quick. And then I'm going to go back around some of those edges. And I'm just going to play with the water and kind of smudge those edges around just a tiny bit. Just so they're not so very, you know, harsh. I don't like harsh lines when I'm doing abstracts. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and on this layer, I'm just going to go ahead and keep going with it, the color that it is, with the water as it is. I'm not going to wipe it off. I am going to switch to a smaller round. And I'm going to use a really nice mossy green. And I'm going to go in here and I'm going to start creating some of the actual other patterns. So I'm just going to kind of make little dots or ovals, whichever one you prefer. And as you can see, because the other color underneath of it is wet, they're kind of spacing out and smudging together to give it more of a blurred effect. That's one of the good things about the water. So if you want to give them more of a blurry, blended together look, keep more water in your brush. Okie dokie. Alright, now I'm going to take, this is like a really deep reddish orange color. And I'm just going to create a couple of actual shapes in here just for fun. So I'm going to put one here. Put one over here. And I'm going to put one up in the top corner, I think, somewhere. So there's my third one. And for this one, I used a pretty dry brush because I want it to be very opaque and I want the color to really pop through. I don't want those other layers kind of coming through. So, rule of thirds, if anyone is a scrapbooker or a card maker or anything like that, the rule of thirds is you put 3 objects, the same object, a repeating object or a repeating color, and you put it in 3 different spots around the piece, and you make it almost into a triangle. It could be any shaped triangle. It doesn't really matter where you put it. You just do 3. That way it bleeds your eye kind of through the actual piece. Just something to keep in mind. Okay, so I went through and I just heated everything back up again so I can get my layer to stabilize. That way it's not being all blendy. And what I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to take this stamp that I made, and this is just a drawer or cabinet liner that I glued to a piece of cardboard, so I'm using that as a little stamp. And then I'm going to take my ink pad and I'm just going to kind of press it in there a little tiny bit. And then I'm just going to put this randomly into the art, just because I wanted to give it a little bit more dimension than the flat look of the watercolor. So I just wanted to give it a little extra pop. So that's what that is there. Okay, we're going to move back into our watercolors now. I'm going to take my same smaller round brush that I was just using, and I'm going to create some leaves with it. So I'm going to do this in a really pretty maroon winey color. And I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to create leaves. These leaves are eventually going to have a stem running down the center of them, so I'm kind of actually painting them like it's already there. So it's going to look like one big leafy stem. This is just creating another layer in the artwork. Gives it a little bit more dimension. You can do as many leaves as you want, as few leaves as you want. It's entirely up to you how you want the piece to turn out. And then I'm just going to add a couple little half leaves down here towards the bottom. All right. And while that's drying, I'm going to actually choose a different color, which is going to be a kind of light tannish brown kind of color is what I'm using now. And I'm going to go up here in the top, and I'm also going to do some leaves. And I am doing this with a fairly wet brush. It's not super, super wet like my backgrounds was, but it's also not a dry brush either. I want the colors to kind of go and do their own thing as I paint. And you can paint your leaves in any shape or design you want. They don't have to look like mine. And I think I'm going to make just a couple little off on their own little vine kind of thing over here. All right. Okay. Now I'm going to move on to a much smaller round. just a little tiny one, so that I can go ahead and draw my stems in there. And this is a fairly dry brush because I want to make a pretty precise line. Now I'm going to move on and do the same thing over here. As you can see, I did use a bit of a darker color for my contrast, just so it has a little bit more depth to it. Okay. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go back in. I'm going to add a little bit more color detail in here, just a little bit of shadowing. So I'm going to go back with the exact same color, but a little bit less water. And I'm just gonna add a little bit of depth into the center of these leaves. If you want to do this part before you do the stem work, you're welcome to. I wasn't sure if I was going to do it or not. That's why I did not do it beforehand. But it kind of makes it look, you know, a little less flat on the leaves. So I'm going to go back and go ahead and do it. And I'm just trying to avoid hitting those stem pieces in the middle there. Like I said, if you want to do it before you draw them, just so that you don't have to worry about avoiding them, go for it. Alrighty, so just a little bit of extra color there. And then I'm going to go back with a wet brush. And I'm just going to kind of pull some of that brand new color I just put in there outward again, so there's not such harsh lines in there. Okay. So now I'm going to get my heat gun out and I'm going to give it another dry down. So I'll be back in just a minute. Okay, so now that I have it all dried off, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to take some paint pens and I am going to add in some lines. Now, this way you can actually embroider over the top of these lines, or you can just keep them in there as a cool another aspect. It doesn't have to be something that you're going to go over, but it can be. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of go in here, and I picked a gold color because I think it'll look really cute, and it's got a metallic look to it. So I'm just going to kind of go in here. Whoops, let me get my pen working here. Let's see if it works. I'm just going to get my pen here, and I'm just going to kind of go and do some random kind of swirls and circles here. Right here in the corner, and then I think I'm going to do another one up here. And maybe another one here. Just a small one on this one though. Okay. And again, like I said, these are lines that you can embroider, or you can just leave them as a little bit of background effect. Okay. I'm going to take another pen here. This one's silver to give it a little bit of another metallic look. And I'm actually just going to go through here. And I'm going to there it goes. There goes my pen. I'm going to go through here. And I'm just going to put down little spots. This is another way to create more layering. As you can see, I went over the top of my leaves. I'm going over the top of the background. I'm going to do it again right here. Hopefully you can see them on the camera, the little tiny dots here. So here's a little tiny dot. Hopefully you can see them. And then I went and did some over here. And then I'm going to do some over here in the blue as well. Obviously, the silver shows up better in certain color backgrounds. Like over here, you can barely see it. On the blue, you can see it much better. So, you know, keep that in mind when you're picking out colors. Okay. I'm just going to take a second to heat it back up real quick. So I just used my heat gun just to make sure that the pen and everything is dry. I don't want to stick my hands in something as I'm embroidering and get it all over the rest of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of my embroidery needles. And then I'm going to pick a color of floss. So I think for this piece, I am actually going to go with a gold, and I think I'm actually going to do some, or if not all, of these lines in here. You could also do down the stem and give it a really cool effect. You could go around these here. You can create little dots with your embroidery floss. It's entirely up to you how you actually want to take and do this. I'm going to go in here. And you know, now that I actually said that about the stems, I think I might actually do that instead, because I think that's going to look really cute. And I'm just tying off my threads. So what I did was you just take and you loop it around, and then you roll it down your finger so that it creates a knot in the end of it. Okay. And I'm just going to trim off that excess little piece because I don't need that. And then you want to start at the back. You're going to come through the back. Okay. So I'm going to put it where I think it is, pretty close to where the stem should be. And I'm just going to push it through the paper. You can also, if you would rather, you could use your needle, or you could use a paper piercer, and you can kind of go through and just poke holes into your pattern, which might be a little bit easier for other people, especially that way you can see where you're poking it through from the front. So this is just a little paper piercer. I bought it at the dollar store. So I'm just going to go through and just poke little holes here up the stem. Like I said, this might be a lot easier. Sometimes if you want, you can, like I said, go through the back and just do it that way. And poke it as you go. It's entirely up to you. Okay, so now that I got holes, as you can see I have holes. It's much easier to see from the back than the front. I'm going to find my bottom hole. And I'm just going to go in and then go to the next hole. And it's going to create a cute little embroidered stitch. Now, you don't want to go back through the same hole, so make sure that you go to the next hole up, okay? And now what you can do is you can either go back into the same hole you went through the first time and create a consistent stitch, or you can skip and go to the next one and leave little in between not stitched pieces, okay? It's entirely up to you. If you want a full stem, go ahead and do the full stem. If you don't, you can skip pieces and just have like, this would be a stitch, this wouldn't, this would be a stitch. So you can do either one. I'm just gonna go through here and just stitch my stem up a little bit. Alrighty, so now I have my cute little embroidery stitch. If you want, you can actually go all the way up into your leaves. That would be kind of really cool. You could also go over here and do this other one. I'm going to go ahead and switch to a different color, and then I'm going to add a couple of little tiny details, kind of like my paint pen circles. I'm just going to add a couple little other things in here. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tie this off real quick. So in order to do that, you just take your needle and you pass it under the last stitch you made. Not the one that you're still holding, the last one, okay? You're going to pull it out, and now you have a little loop, okay? This side doesn't move. This side moves back and forth. This one gets bigger. This one does not, okay? So what you want to do is you want to take your needle and wrap it around the side that doesn't move 3 times. And then you're going to pull your string all the way through it and tighten it up. That's how you form your knot. Okay. Be careful when you pull, when you're at the end of your knot here. You don't want to pull too hard and rip out all of your stitching and ruin your page, okay? So just be really careful of that. Alrighty, so now I have a pretty magenta in here that I think will go really good with this. And I'm going to do just a couple of random stitches. So I'm going to go ahead and just put a few holes in here, and I'm doing them all kind of around where I did the silver dots. And I'm not going to do very many of them, just a few, so I don't want it to be too much. Okay. So I'm going to go in here, and what I'm going to do is I've already made my knot at the bottom, so it won't come through the paper, okay? Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to make a little bit of French knots down here in these little holes. So I'm just trying to find one of the holes that I made, okay? And I've already made a knot in the bottom so that my thing won't come through, okay? So for a French knot, what you're going to do is you're going to take your needle and you're going to wrap it around twice. And then you're going to point it right back into the exact same hole, if you can. If not, get it as close as possible, okay? And the key to making a French knot is to actually hold this piece firmly. You don't want to hold it too tight where you're going to make a really, really super crazy tight knot, but you want to hold it where everything goes through it and this knot stays like this. If you do it too loose, everything comes loose and then your knot's going to be way back here in your thread somewhere, okay? So just make sure that you hold it pretty tight and you have your little knot way down towards the bottom. And then you're just going to kind of pull everything through it. Okay? And then once you get closer to the end, you can let go and do it really slow and then just kind of pull it. And it makes a cute little tiny knot. Okay? So, and then you can move on to wherever your next hole is. And then you just repeat and do another French knot in there. Okay, so 1, 2, put it real close, put your needle back down, hold on to this one over here, push it through, pull everything through. Okay. And then once you get here again, you can let go and pretty slowly pull it down so that it forms your knot. Okay, I'm going to go through and go ahead and just keep making more knots. So keep making all those knots wherever you put them. Alrighty, so hopefully you got all your cute little French knots in there wherever you wanted. Again, I was trying really hard to do the rule of third thing. Like I said, I have 3 of them here, and then I have my silver dots and my French knots here, here, and here. It just kind of draws your eye around in triangles. So it's just a little something to keep in mind when you're doing it. And you can put them anywhere. I mean, you could put a big old patch of them, you know, pretty much anywhere you want. Or like I said, if you wanted to take some of the gold or something else and kind of run it through these and make little patterns, you could do that as well. It's just kind of fun to play around with different stitching. I'm going to go ahead and tie this off real quick. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run it underneath here. And the piece that doesn't move, I'm going to wrap it around 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Pull my needle through and tie my knot down. Again, just remember not to pull too tightly because you could rip out your stitching through your paper. And there is your very first abstract piece. So when we come back, we'll be working on our second one. Hope you enjoyed the first, and we'll see you for the next one. Okie dokie, so we're just going to jump right on in and get started on this next piece. I'm just going to wet down my paper so I can do my background. And the trick here is to get it wet but not soak it. You don't want it totally wet. You don't want it to be dripping if you were to pick it up, okay? That's not good. All right. So on this piece, I'm going to do a lot of greens and light browns because I want it to look really nice and cute and natural. So that's what I'm going to go for. So I'm going to go back to that tanny brown color, and I'm just going to start running my color up here in the corner and down here a bit. And I want this color to be super just background. So I'm going to go ahead and use mostly water. I'm just going to make a couple of spots here. And then I'm going to go in here with some olivey green. And I do want this to stand out a little bit more. I don't want it to be so much background, so I'm going to use a lot more color. I'm going to do it right here. And I'm going to do a little bit up here in this corner. Alrighty, and then for my last one, I'm actually going to do a pretty dark green color. And as you can see, I'm not drying anything off in between my layers on this one. I really want them to kind of do a blending thing. So I'm not going to do any drying in between. Alright, and I'm actually going to go back through here, and I'm going to take a very vivid bright green, and I'm just going to do a couple little splotches. so it kind of blends some of the colors a little bit. Just do a little tiny bit of it. Okay. Now I'm going to go and I'm going to use my heat gun and I'm going to let it dry so that I can move on to the next layer. Alrighty, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go in and add some of my background effects with my pen real quick. I'm just going to add some of those little swirlies. I'm also using that thirds again, because I want everything to be consistent. Now I'm going to go in, that was a yellow ochre. Now I'm going to go in with a bronze and I'm going to add a few dots. And these ones I'm actually going to do to highlight some of the shapes that are already in here. So I'm just going to do some of the edging on some of these colors. And let's do one more edge right here, maybe. Okay, so those are my little background effects that I'm going to add in there. Now I'm going to go back in and I'm going to draw some leaves again. So I'm going to take a pretty small round because I want my leaves to be semi-small on this piece. And I'm going to go in with a really nice chocolatey brown color. I'm going to just draw some leaves in here. The more water you use, the more see-through and translucent your layer will be. The less water you use, the more opaque it will be. You will not be able to see the effects and things going on behind it. So keep that in mind when you're doing it, depending on what kind of look you want. And I'm going to create another one up here. And even though I want them to be leaves, I don't want these two bushes to be matchy-matchy. So I'm kind of doing different leaves on both. All right, so similar but not the same. Okay. While I let those dry a little bit, I'm going to go to one of my smaller rounds and I'm going to paint the stems on it. Again, I'm using a pretty dry brush just because I want my stems to be a very specific shape, size, and I want a lot more control over what they're doing. Okay, we're going to go down this one here, straight down the middle there. Okay. Because I want them different, I'm not going to go ahead and add that the leaf insides to this one. I want them to be a little tiny bit different. Alright, so I'm going to go in here and I am going to heat it back up again so that everything's dry before I continue. Alright, so for this one, I'm just going to go ahead and use my gold. I want this picture to be pretty minimalistic compared to the first one that we did. I don't want a whole lot going on. That other one was a lot of stuff. So this one I'm trying to keep pretty simple, just so it's a pretty basic, you know, simple pattern so you can kind of see the difference between a lot of it and a little. Okay, so I'm just going to get my needle here. Whoops. Okay. I'm going to tie a knot in the end. Wrap it around the finger, twist down your finger, and pull tight. It makes a little knot at the end. So I think what I'm going to do on this piece is I think I'm actually going to go over some of this with my gold. So I'm going to take my paper piercer and I'm going to go through here and I'm just going to kind of punch some holes through some of these. And I'm not even going to do all of it. I'm just going to do some certain little spots. Okay. Now I'm going to go back up here. Lastly, I'm going to go up here to this one. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to stitch all of them in that very straight stitch. So we're going to go through and we're going to just find a hole on the end of one of my loops. Okay, put it through the hole, put it down into the next hole, and then I'm going to go to the next hole, back up, and I'm actually just going to skip holes on this one. I'm not going to do a solid line like I did the last time. So I'm going to do a stitch, a skip, a stitch, a skip, a stitch. Okay? Alrighty, so as you can see, I'm doing my stitch skip. And I'm just going to keep doing that until I'm all done with all 3 of these. Alrighty, so now that we got all of our little tiny stitches in here, and like I said, I'm going to try to keep it minimal. I don't want to do a whole lot to this particular piece. I'm going to go ahead and tie it off. And we're gonna call this piece done. So there you have just your little tiny itty bitty bit of stitching in on your thing. If you wanted, you could add some of those French knots in here where the rest of the knots are. You could add some cute little French knots up all your leaves. You could do a French knot down your stems. You could do more of these lines in different colors. It's entirely up to you how you want to go ahead and finish the piece. I think mine's pretty done though. So we'll see you back here for that last piece. Okay, so for that last piece, we're gonna do something pretty vibrant. So we're just gonna go ahead and get started. I'm gonna go ahead and wet down my paper. Okay. And then I'm gonna use one of my big rounds, and I'm gonna go ahead and just start the background. I'm going to do it in a very light blue color with a lot of water. Now I'm going to go ahead and move on to some vibrant green. This is a very lime green. I'm just going to do a tiny little line down here like this, and something down here in the corner, I think. Alright, just little tiny pops of green in there. Now I'm going to move on to some orange, a nice, vibrant, beautiful orange. And I kind of want these colors to blend together as well, so I'm not going to dry off in between these layers on this piece. Now the last color I'm going to put in here is a darker blue. I'm just going to kind of play it around through the center here. I'm just gonna wipe down this line right here so it's not so harsh. I'm just moving some water around a little bit and blowing on it so that it kind of dries a tiny bit. That's all I'm doing off camera. Okay. Alright, so now that my background is done, I'm going to go ahead and dry everything off real fast. Alrighty, so the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take a flat brush, a pretty small one, probably about 1/4 of an inch, and I'm going to make some background shapes in here. I'm going to use a pink, and I'm going to go in, I'm just going to kind of randomly make some squares. And they don't all have to be the same size. You can make them bigger, you can make them smaller. You can make them the same size if you want. You can make them overlap each other. It's entirely up to you what you want to do with them. Okay. Now I'm going to go in with a pretty dark green color and make some more. Just random little rectangles, I guess. They're not actually squares, but, you know, squares or rectangles. Oops. Alright, and last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take that same vibrant bright orange, but I'm going to do it with a whole lot less water. And I'm just going to add some orange boxes or rectangles or squares or whatever it is you want to actually call them. Alrighty. Now I'm going to take an orange paint pen and I am going to add some of my detail lines in there as soon as I can get my pen to work here. Okay, and I'm just going to go around some of these edges. I'm just going to add in some cute little lines here. Just kind of randomly, wherever I feel like it. Okay. And now, what I'm gonna do for this piece, instead of the leaves like I did the last time, I'm actually gonna do the leaves in embroidery. So I am going to just draw where I'm going to do them. And I'm gonna use a really bright magenta because that's one of the colors that I'm using. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna just sketch some leaves. I think I'm gonna do one here. Let me get my pen working. Just gonna do one here. And I don't know that I will go ahead and embroider all these little inside lines, but I'm definitely going to do the outside lines. And the reason I'm doing embroidery instead of full leaves is because I think there's already a ton of stuff going on this piece in the background, and I want to keep that background. I don't want to cover it up with any of the leaves like I was kind of doing the last couple pieces. Okay, so there's one, and then I'm just gonna flip it upside down and sweep another couple of leaves right across the top here. Okie dokie. You know what? Maybe I'm going to do another little tiny one. Just a little guy. Just like a couple of leaves. Right here on the side. Alrighty, so there we go. Now I am going to go ahead and embroider those, but what I'm going to do first is I'm actually going to do some little tiny French knots on here. And I'm going to do those in a really pretty pink color that's kind of going to pull out the pink that I used in here. This one's actually, it's not really a pink, it's more of like a peachy pink kind of color. So it'll go with all of my colors that I already have in there. Kind of pull out some of the orange and some of the pink. So I'm just prepping my thread here, getting it through my needle, tying my knot. Okay, now I'm going to go in here and I'm going to poke some holes where I'm kind of going to put some of these French knots. And again, I'm going to kind of use the pattern itself to do some of them. So I'm kind of following some of the lines that are inside here. And I'm going to do another set right in here. Okay, so just a few, not a whole lot of them. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started here. Again, French knot. You're going to wrap it twice. 1, 2, put it back down into the same hole. And then make sure you hold this end nice and not completely tight, but you want it tight enough where everything's not going to lose its shape when you pull it in there, okay? All right, and now you got a French knot. So I'm going to keep on going. Alrighty, so now that we got all of our cute little French knots in here, I'm going to go ahead with my magenta, and I'm probably going to do at least the stem on this. I'm not sure if I'm going to do the outer edges or the inside lines, but I'm going to do at least the stem work so that I can have a little bit more pop of embroidery floss in there. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And there we have it, our last beautiful piece of embroidered artwork. Now from here you can take any of them and you can frame them. You can use them in mixed media pieces. You could use them on the front of a card. It just depends on what size you made it and what you really want to do with it. So play around with your stitches, get creative, go on YouTube, find different stitches if you want so that you can actually go in there and do a little bit more if you would like. It's all up to you from here. Have fun and we'll see you at the next workshop.